You're now watching Two Old Farts Making Noises. Welcome to Canadian Art Today with your host, Paul Constable.
I did it.
You did
David's gonna be very proud of me that I didn't screw it up. So
Well, he just lost his jaw.
I know, really, David. I don't know what do we need you for? No, David's my partner. David will be back on May 1st. We have a whole bunch of new things, but today we have a very special artist that you are bringing to talk to us about on Artist in Canada. So who is our guest today, Mr. Paul?
Well, we have Kate Taylor. I guess I call her a kind of an impressionistic abstract painter. I mean, she does paint natural scenes in her own manner. Now, Kate is joie de vie, joy of life, I guess I'll call it in her work. Textures, I guess, they respond to her natural rhythms and things of nature. And I guess it's just a colorful response that she has on her work. I guess it has a very distinctive style and it's very recognizable, which is something a lot of artists should consider, looking at ways to make their work stand out from others, especially if you're doing similar things like nature or whatever, just plants or abstracts or landscapes. She has a couple of shows coming up. We'll talk about that as well. So just like to welcome Kate. Yeah.
And Kate, there you are. She's live with us.
Hey,
Yeah.
good to meet you guys.
Yeah,
good to meet you.
Yeah, that's good. No, it's great. We had this great little conversation. Maybe a year ago on your Instagram, I guess, and then this is a reciprocal conversation. I guess we'll go a little bit farther. It's about you this time, not me. So,
which I have to say, I never really talk about myself, so it's going to be weird because I have no problem interviewing other artists, but it's going to be strange.
Well, I'll be putting words in your mouth then. Don't worry.
Awesome, that's good.
Now, before you two get into interviewing, this is going to be interesting. I have a feeling you'll be interviewing each other, and I'm going to sit back and enjoy this because I don't have the same thing. You, Kate, have a podcast and also a YouTube channel that you're going to be, I guess, resurrecting. So tell us about that, and then we'll let Paul go into all of the beautiful art that you're doing. So potential fans, new fans, and old fans can track you down.
That would be awesome.
Sure.
So I started, I am, unlike a lot of artists, I'm an extrovert. I love people. I get my energy from people. So when the pandemic started, I was really kind of depressed and alone and really missing those conversations where I just didn't know where they were going to go. So I had been thinking about doing a podcast for a while, but there felt like there was a lot of requirements to make it perfect. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I just basically said, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to go live on Instagram. I'll invite my friends. I'll see if anybody's interested. And if things go wrong, they go wrong. And that's just the reality of the authentic person that I am. Like, it is what it is. You get what you see. And so I got to about 110 episodes, did them every week on Thursday. They were fabulous. I got to really meet a lot of incredible people. It was so inspirational. And I learned so much about how other artists produce and what their inspiration was. Unfortunately, I lost my Instagram channel earlier, so I kind of stopped doing them, but I think I'm going to resurrect them. So I have about 60 episodes where you get your podcasts on Spotify or Apple Podcast. And I have about 100 episodes on my youtube.com/Kate Taylor Art channel. So yeah, if people can subscribe, that'd be great. It'd be nice to know that people are benefiting from these interviews because I found the artists were so generous with their knowledge and advice and time.
Right. Very cool. That's what we find with this. That's why we enjoy this. But when you were talking about it before the show, I was like, no, you need to tell everybody. And everybody, yes, David's not here, so there'll be no banner. But down here in the description with Kate and who she is and what, we will have all the links so you can find her wherever you get your podcasts, or you can find her on YouTube. So
yeah, and I'm going to start it up again because I have had a lot of requests recently. So this is actually perfect timing for me.
There you go. So there you have it. Paul, she's all yours, my friend.
Thanks. No, you're a great advocate for artists, I think. Artists need that kind of inspiration, and it's sort of what I try to do as well. We try to connect people as much as we can, and artists sharing with other artists and helping them along. And some need advice and some don't need advice. And
Mhm.
so, but I think people always they like to see an artist's studio. They love to see what's behind you. And I see you have great artwork behind you as well. And
So
there you go. And we've got some visuals that we'll bring up as we move along in our conversation. So
great.
yeah, so I see, and we had a video clip that'll have to be posted later because we just couldn't handle it in our short little piece that we've got here, so it'll be available as well. If you're working at your cottage, I guess on one of your pieces in a little conversation, can you tell us a little bit about how you work, your process?
Yeah, actually, I just want to talk a little bit about the video because it was sort of interesting. During COVID, we basically moved up to the cottage. I converted my bunkie into an art studio, which was awesome, and it was great to be able to have the space and a big patio and overlook the water. That particular video was originally done it was actually a San Diego initiative called the Women X, and kind of capitalizing on the Dalai Lama's concept of joy and bringing more joy into your life. And since my work is all about joy, they asked me to do this video clip. So this ended up being incorporated into I think it was like a 4 or 6 hour documentary over 4 different categories, and it won a bunch of Cannes awards, and so that was really cool. So it was kind of neat to be a part of that.
No, it's like, yeah, and it's nice to see Canadian artists kind of making inroads across that border a little bit. And we have some
Yeah.
great artists. I mean, but then you know what? They have great as artists as well. There's a ton of artists out there, like a lot
yeah.
of artists. So a lot of it is trying to, how do you stand out from those other artists? Like, especially when you go to those, I guess I call them egg carton shows. Like they're a million little booths that are white, and everybody's got their little 10 by 10, and they're trying to garner a bit of attention. I found that I did a Vancouver one a few years ago, and you almost need to leave a breadcrumb to find out where you've been. Like if you like certain artists.
Yeah.
How do you feel about some of those shows that you've been involved in?
It's I do probably between 20 and 25 shows a year if I include the art fairs, the outdoor shows, the group shows, gallery shows, things like that. So I am one of these artists who I work really hard. I put a lot of hours into my craft, but also into the marketing and the promotion of it too, which is through those shows. I think they're valuable for me just because, it's a way of meeting new people and helping collectors make decisions about what kind of art they want to have in their home, and whether or not they choose mine or somebody else's. I don't really care. If artists are selling, then I think that's a good thing for all artists. People will laugh at me because one of my phrases is always "a rising tide floats all boats." And I really believe that as artists, we can help each other benefit, we can learn from each other, and we can help drive collectors generally to have more real original art on their walls. So that's kind of what my driver is. And the shows allow me to do that and reach out to people. Now, I know it's a surprise, but I'm a little bit of an extrovert. So I love people and I love talking to people. And those shows really energize me. And so for me, it's something I really enjoy. It's not something that I feel like I have to do. And so that kind of makes the whole thing more fun. And the artist community is awesome. So I get to reconnect with my friends. I get to reconnect with collectors. I get to meet new people. I get to talk about me and I get to talk about my art. So it's all good things, really. It's easy to do.
How many shows do you do over the border, like in the States?
I have a couple of galleries across in the US, so I do shows there. I just did one at ADC in Cincinnati. And then the shows I typically do, I do San Diego pretty religiously. I love that show. I did Dallas last year. I've done Art Expo New York. So some of it is determining where I think my market is going to be. Some of it is, frankly, I always wanted to go to San Diego, so it seemed like a great opportunity to go and actually make it there and write it off. But I've done that show for 5 years now.
Yeah. And so some are better than others, as usual. Like some more receptive, or does it take a while to build a following?
I think it does take a while. I think that people need to have a little bit of time to digest the work. I do think that in some ways abstract is a little bit more challenging for people to wrap their heads around versus representational. With representational work, which I love and I have a lot of it in my own collection, but it's easier for especially a novice collector to look at that and say, oh, that's supposed to be a tree. It looks like a tree, must be a piece of good art. I feel comfortable spending the money on it. With abstract, I think people are always a little concerned that they're getting ripped off and that I've been asked this before. It's like, well, do you do abstract because you don't know how to paint? I'm like, no, I do abstract because I'm choosing to do abstract because I love the idea of not getting bogged down in the details, but really capturing more of the energy and the movement and the color and joy of nature versus, painting a tree, which that's just my thing. But it means that I think you have to spend a bit more time helping to educate people about your work.
Yeah.
I think people need to see it more often. And I think that, abstract art seems to be a little bit better received south of the border, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think, well, the pieces that are behind you, for instance, your work has a very distinctive look. I'm gonna try. What the heck? Maybe Stephen, you have to. There you go. There we go. Yeah, I even got fancy and put titles with your work as well.
I know, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, and it's awesome that you took a close up because, so for me, the work is about, at a big level, the work is about capturing the joy that you feel when you're really deeply present in nature. And a lot of that comes from spending time at our family cottage. It's been in the family for 50 years, so it's a very integral part of my childhood. And it's where, no matter what was going on in my life, I would go there and I would relax and I would just put my feet into the soil and I would feel really connected to the earth, but also just more calm and more relaxed.
Is that the Muskoka area you're in?
It's actually north of Kingston, so it's Frontenac.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's raw, it's bedrock and it's
Yeah.
cliffs and it's
Shield country, beautiful. And it's
Yeah.
beautiful in
Yeah.
the fall there. That's awesome. So I
oh, stunning.
could see
Yeah.
some of the colors. So you have a very, I guess I call it an impressionistic, abstract way of working. So it's this colored field that you have as a background.
hmm
And I did a kind of a blow up here. You can see you work with a palette knife. I'd see most of the time. Is it most of the time you use a palette knife?
All of the time.
All
So yeah, so there's a couple of things. I first of all, I love color. That's a driving force across everything. And even my pieces, which are black, are still very colorful. This
Right.
particular one, with being able to play with the oranges and the yellows and the golds, is just a lot of fun for me.
Yeah.
And I like the palette knife because it doesn't allow me to get too tight and fussy and bogged down in the details. It's really more about capturing those kind of the joy and the energy and the movement.
So
One of the things, sorry,
no, go ahead. No.
one of the things I do try and do though is to have each one of those little petals be interesting in and of its own right. So I'll mix anywhere between 3 and 6 or 7 colors on the knife. So in a single knife swipe, as you can see in that close up, thank you very much. You can see multiple colors, and that's something that is a technique that has kind of been a little bit perfected as I've painted and become more comfortable with the palette knife. But I think it also makes the painting ultimately a lot more interesting and something you can continue to look at and see new things in it for the next, 50 years.
Yeah. No, it does have lots of energy in it, and I do like this. It's this fragmented blowout look. It feels like it could be flowers, birds, insects. It can have that life of nature to it. So it's really hard to find the things that speak on behalf of yourself. And I think you're trying to find a way to respond to that nature of that day, or if the bugs you might have, but also the nice butterflies and the birds that may be around you while you're in your environment. So,
Mhm.
but this one almost has, like, and later on we'll go on here too, a bit of an aquatic feel to them, where you're under the water. Say it's almost a Caribbean water feeling. I guess it's relative to the color palette.
Yeah, I would say that most people actually do see underwater coral reefs or
Yeah,
goldfish or things like that. Interestingly, the perception changes based on geography. When I did San Diego, I got a lot of people seeing aerial views of paddle boards or surfboards or things like that.
yeah,
And for me, I think that is part of the thing that I just love about painting abstract. Like what I see in this and what I create in this as a process artist is not necessarily what the end user sees. And I think that's a really cool sharing of a different language based on a unity of an image.
yeah. So do you do like mini little color SketchUps before you do the one, or you're just go in cold and just get it done?
Yeah, I'm kind of weird. I think as you were saying, the painting captures the personality, and I think fundamentally I'm a little bit contrary. So I use absolutely no reference at all. I kind of feel, even though intellectually I know that's not cheating, there's a part of me that feels like that's cheating. I work flat, so I don't really actually have an up or a down. I don't sign the front of my work, so you can hang it in any orientation. And I like to make it compositionally strong in any of those orientations. And I like to play with taking traditional rules of good painting guidelines, and kind of trying to break those. So part of that is often the focal point is in the center of the painting. You'll notice all of my paintings have nothing in the focal point in the center. It's really more about trying to draw the eye to the natural wood grain, which again, I think is a beautiful component of the work that is very unpredictable, but creates that kind of, I guess, green bathing concept of being really part of nature. I like to mix my colors on the knife. I like to do complementaries, like purple and yellow on the same swath, so that I can get them to be clean colors, but without getting that brown mix that you get when you mix complementaries.
So you're working on board, is what you're working on?
Yeah, I work on a Baltic Birch panel. They're made for me, so they have really interesting wood grain, and I stain it. So you can see there the graduation between the blues, the aquas, and the greens. And that is probably about 5 to 7 layers of super thin stain. So I'll stain it and pull it back. And that way I can get the graduation of color, but also make sure that I still retain the wood grain, because the wood grain is really important part of the composition for me.
Yeah, I think later on here I've got a couple ones where we kind of blow in on ones that are more dramatic. You can see the actual wood grain, and we can go into some of those. It almost feels like water ripples. It can feel like clouds. It can feel like a lot of things. That wood grain is really wild at times.
Mm-hmm.
No, I like working on a Baltic Birch panel as well. So it's
yeah.
But
I like the fact. I also like the fact that with the wood grain that it's very unpredictable. So yeah. I get my panels made so they have really interesting wood grain, but sometimes they absorb the stain very evenly, so it's not very dramatic, and sometimes it's super dramatic, and that's really just this specific piece of wood. And I think I kind of like that serendipity of that. Is there's a lot of unexpected potential things that happen as I'm working, and I like the kind of the idea of having to problem solve around that.
That's called experience.
And play, a combination of the two, I think.
Well, if you're willing to let what happens, and you can
Mm-hmm.
work with it and figure out how can I make that an advantage to my little disaster that I anticipated was going to be a great thing, and it turns out great, and it also moves things along. So I think you see different things. Like all of a sudden, it's not just water anymore. It could be a sky. It can be a lot of different things, even of the same day, if you let it work and help you rather than fighting it. So
yeah,
especially when you're working with an open surface, like that's the thing, right? You haven't sealed the surface up with gesso. You're letting it respond. So therefore, you have to work with it, because it's your team. I guess I'll call it like that.
No, you're right. But it's a bit of an unforgiving team, because it's raw wood. If I put a color down, I can't pull it back. So which means I have to really commit. And that's the other part of it I like, is that I can't control Z it. I can't overpaint it. I have to commit to what's there. And if I screw it up, I have to figure out how to solve the problem, which I'm sure as an artist you also appreciate. And sometimes from those screw ups, you end up with something that takes you in a different direction, or is really innovative, or something you kind of go, wow, not at all what I expected. But with new eyes, I can see that I really like it, and it's the start of something very cool.
Yeah, the watercolors are like that a little bit. So you can get darker, but you can't get lighter.
I'm terrible with watercolors.
Yeah, you can just go straight to acrylic after that and stretch it.
Yeah.
And seal up those pores. I guess I look at the composition a lot of times, and I said, and I really looked at a lot of your work here while building this PowerPoint here for this presentation. But and initially I thought, geez, everything's the same, right? Everything's heavy on the bottom and light on the top, colored backgrounds. And then the more I looked at them, the more complicated it looked. But your work is very distinctive. Like, and I give you full credit for that. I mean, you go into a large venue where there's 300 artists, and you're walking around, and after you've seen 10, 12, 14 artists, your mind plugs up. I've been there. You go there, and then you forget where you've seen that art that you liked. You need to go back, and you're comparing between two artists, for instance. Where do I find that one artist? Where do I find the other one? But I find your work really sets a bookmark in their brain a little bit, I think, because there's continuity. I guess I'll call the word continuity without being boring continuity, right? I think you need that, and I was trying to explain that to other artists. Like they paint everything all over the board, you know, still lifes, landscapes, everything, and you can't tell who did what. But some people have that ability to paint a variety of different things, and you know it's them. It's sort of, it's just they've got a way of painting and a signature and a look, and being able to stay to that true. And you are like 20 shows a year. That's a volume of work,
Mhm.
and trying to keep inspired about your work as well when doing that much volume with um, all on board. I think you've got some round ones here. We'll show a couple of those. But so you've changed the shapes a little bit, which changes design altogether when you do a round one. If anyone
Yes, it does.
knows, it's like doing square is different than doing horizontal, really. But this is quite a dramatic piece, and it's very nocturnal feeling.
Well, and this one started with, my work is about joy, and I truly like to try and paint when I'm feeling joyful and when I'm in a joyful frame of mind. I think that kind of comes through in the work. It comes through in the choices of color. And I was having a bit of a slump for a couple of weeks, and I'm like, oh, I just feel depressed and down and lethargic. And I thought, I'm just going to do what a lot of artists do, and I'm going to paint out my angst. So I started with these black backgrounds, and they're actually teal and sapphire and dark blue and black. So you can't really see them but in real life, you can definitely see the graduation of color. And then I pulled out my palette of about 35 colors, and I start painting, and I felt so much better after it. And I came in the next morning, I'm like, well, I guess I just don't have that much angst, because at the end of the day, it's still a pretty joyful piece, I think.
Yeah,
So
but and this one feels like fireflies maybe, and it can feel
mhm.
like when you start inspiring other things rather than, that's what the thing is with this. It's not a specific thing. It can be whatever you see in it, and that's what the magic is about. When you go to a city that is ocean based or coastal, and one is a landlocked city, people see things differently in subject matter, and if you're willing to let them see whatever they want, and not be definitive about what it is. I'm painting a flower, and this is the way it's going to be, a daffodil. And you guys just know that's a rose, and you feel perfect. You see what it is. I'm just a really bad artist, whatever you call it, whatever you like. But
Yeah.
yeah, but I think it's difficult working on a dark surface because everything can be that silhouette feeling, right? If you're the silhouettes on the shade kind of feel, and that cutout feeling of hard edge. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, but a palette knife, you got to live with some of that hard edge, I guess.
You do it, but it's interesting because I actually tend to, with the palette knife, tend to work with very thick, heavy-bodied acrylics. So I actually get more of a soft edge, and I like a rounded edge, and I like the organic shapes of the palette knife. I just find it a little bit more interesting than kind of doing it sharp. And I guess I use the palette knife in a way that's a little bit unusual in the sense that I don't scrape across as much. I actually almost like flip like you're, frosting a cake or something, you
Yeah.
know.
So have you ever scraped something right down, start over again?
Occasionally, again, because I'm on the wood, what ends up happening is I end up going back sometimes to the piece you've got up right now, which is part of my color field collection. So color field is where I started when I started with the palette knife, and it was like a full color on the background, full canvas pieces. And then when I started staining and started doing resin, obviously the wood made a lot more sense, and that kind of took on its own direction. But I do, like you say, I really try and hard to have that continuity so that regardless of which collection I'm working on or what you see of what I've produced, because I work in about 6 collections at the same time, that it still has kind of that look of being a Kate Taylor.
Yeah.
And it's, I think it has to do with the fact that fundamentally, I guess I'm a process artist, and I love the process of painting. I'm much less, it's not that I don't love the work at the end of the day. I wouldn't let it release if I didn't love the work, but I have no need to hold on to it. Like, to me, the act of creating is the creating of it. And when it's done, it can go. Please go to a gallery, go sit in someone else's home. Hopefully they get the same joy out of looking at it that I got out of producing it.
There's a lot of children. You can have as many as you like.
Exactly. I can make more.
I have lots of children. Yeah, this one is actually okay. You're working your gradated background a little differently, so it's a little more textural background. So
Yeah, and this one's on canvas. So part of the challenge of working on wood is that you can only really get so large because it's heavy and it's hard to move around, it's hard to ship. So I have a gallery in Naples, Florida, and she really wanted canvas work. So I kind of went back to my roots of doing the color field work, but modified it a little bit with the pieces I'm doing now, which I think are a little bit more sophisticated than what I was doing 10 years ago. And I really kind of like I don't know, like the juxtaposition of the palette knife background and then the palette knife on top of it.
Yeah, it feels more painterly, realistic painterly, this one, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think the little spots are integrating with the sky. So they're there, but they're not jumping out in your face because they're integrated with the textures of the above. I wouldn't even say sky. It's about the top 2/3 of the piece. But I've seen other people when they want to gradate things in a large scale on a canvas, they'll use a sponge roller or something like that and thin it up, and they build up their layers with a sponge roller and get that nice gradation that they want, and then they work back on top of it. So I can see it if that's what you want to do. I like how this is integrating though. It's not that because you don't have to deal with the texture of a wood grain, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've got to stimulate. It can't just be a solid color. It could be, but I think it's more interesting with what you did there. Like you can see the enlargement off on the right there of the daubles of the paint and how they integrate with some of that blue.
And I think that's what makes it fun to do, because I think as you move your palette knife across a piece, you pick up some of the color that was underneath, right? So it continues to build and connect. And with the pieces on panel, in photographs, you don't really see it, but in real life, you can definitely see that the background you can see that wood grain, you can see the graduation of color. So that becomes interesting as well, but it's much more subtle. And so I wanted to kind of continue the same concept and feeling with the palette knife work that was just purely on canvas. But it's its own thing, it's got its own voice.
So how wet on wet or is this piece while you're working on it? So you're working from the background to the foreground because you can see the layers of paint and they're getting darker in the foreground to give you a bit of depth for the work that's going back there. But like you said, are the colors mixing with each other while you're daubling the paint on in there? Or
generally, yes. So what I'll tend to do is I tend to work, I'd say 90% of the composition down in one sitting. So that way I get the paint that's really thick. I can pull it from different places and I get this kind of continuity. So the eye will work around the painting because of the fact I've picked up the turquoises over here and it's picking up the yellow somewhere else. With this one, I did a lot of the background up to about half of it at an earlier sitting because it was hard on my back because I work flat. And then what I do is I mix the foliage and I pull those together. So I work down that internal band where the sky meets the flower garden at the same time. And so then I do get some of the pinks that get integrated into the background of the sky and the blues that get integrated into the kind of foliage.
Yeah. So do you see this expanding into something? Okay, so you've done these for quite a few years, these ones, this style. Have you seen expanding into the next level of this kind of work in this fashion? Have you gone there in your thought yet as to how does this evolve to the next state? What is the next? Get over that fence. Where's the next fence?
It's hard to say because I find that I like the looseness of the knife. I can't see going back to a brush. That doesn't interest me. And so for me, I just continue to paint the things that I love to paint. And at the One of a Kind this year, a lot of people kind of commented. They said, "Oh, you've got a new collection. And it's a different mark making." And I'm like, "Oh, I didn't actually realize that I had changed that," and the petals became a little bit fatter and rounder versus long and thin. So I think some of this transition happens slowly. And what happens is if I find that I've got something that looks very different from my previous work, then I kind of clump that into a different collection. So this is color field. The previous one is energy in motion, which is probably most of my work is in energy in motion. I work on a series called Tranquility, which is kind of on the side of the palette knife. So it's quite different than this one. And that helps to keep it fresh, I think, because there's the different collections require different levels of energy to produce. And so I kind of keep flipping back and forth between those.
So are you always on the hunt for different types of knives and texturing that can be created?
Oh, yeah, I'm terrible. I am. And then I go back to the same one all the time. Like I've used the same knife for years, and I have about 50 of the same knife. And then I go buy bigger ones and pointier ones, and I go back to the same knife. And
Have you
partially
tried?
it's,
Yeah. Have you tried those rubber ones? The rubber.
yeah, I have tried those. I think part of it is I like the knife that I love the most has a really rounded tip. And so that's really where you have those round organic shapes and not the sharp shapes, which I like.
Right. Yeah. And then a lot of times there's other utilitarian tools you can use that were say I don't know, plaster types of equipment like that they can use. I don't know. We're looking at like do some clay work, and you got dental picks. You can use
Mhm.
for doing things that are in another purpose, right? They were meant
Yeah.
for. So,
I'm a weird purist, I think.
okay.
I use cotton rags and liquid acrylic for my backgrounds, and I just use this one palette knife. But what I do is I use about 35 separate colors on my palette.
Wow.
And so I know that people often will say, well, you can save on paint if you mix it with a molding paste or something like that. But the way I work is pretty immediate, and I like to work very intuitively when it comes to actually mixing the color on the knife. And I find if I have to stop and mix things, I kind of lose that zone. And so I
Right.
tend to work directly from the tube, but it mixes on the palette, and it mixes on the painting versus on the palette.
Yeah, I get it's maybe a little different with watercolor. If you start mixing those, you get quite a few colors in that mix if you're not careful. If you had
Mhm.
37 colors of watercolor rather than half a dozen that you could mix to your color anyway, but because you can get mud very quickly if you're not careful in your mixings. But you
Absolutely.
also,
And with this too, because you can see I have a lot of orange and blue, for example, which, we mix them together, you get mud. There's a lot of like the reds and greens. Oh, so my circles, my bubbles.
there's your bubbles. The world, you know what? They're very worldly. I love them. They have an environmental world look about them, and there's this splash of liquid at the bottom of a wine glass look on the one on the left. It just,
That's really good.
I love the feeling. That's sure that you can just see that you're rolling the glass around and smelling it, and just. But they almost feel. Remember, you used to have those snowballs you used to shake up, and the
Oh
little
yeah, the globes.
the globes. And this is what this one got me thinking about. I thought this underwater world on the right, and they said it's just like it shook up this little globe of artifacting that can trickle down into those spaces. So again,
Yeah.
I'm getting a different feeling than possibly you when you're painting them. But the circle really inspired a whole different thought to me, like completely changed. It's not square, but it's somewhat based. But those round edges pull your eyeball up. They don't fall off the edge of the page.
And it's very interesting. So I've been really interested in doing circles for a long time because I like the organic shape, but it was very, very difficult to get the panels until fairly recently. And so I host a show called Pi Art Squared, which is obviously a play on Pi R squared. And I invite anywhere between 50 and 60 artists to paint on 12-inch circles. And we have a show on Pi R Squared Day, which is March 14th. And it's been really interesting how many artists have never painted on circles before that. And they kind of say, compositionally, you have to really rethink it all. Like the stuff that you've been doing for ages, that's kind of pretty traditional for you, it just doesn't work the same way in a circle. And I think that that's kind of the fun part of just having to kind of reset your brain a little bit with a different shape than what you've traditionally worked on.
Yeah. And it does. It changes. I think it changes the concept completely. Like it's like
Mhm.
a 90-degree turn as far as the same. A shape right away does change it, and your adjustment to it is still the same. You've got a 2/3 piece at the top that's fairly uh, solid plane, and then you have your texture on the bottom. It's still working, like I said, but it's working in a different way, right? And the other one has a very night feeling or aquatic feeling on the one on the right, the darker one, so the blue and the red. So
Mhm.
no, they have a different kind of magic to them. So like I said, I looked through your body of work and I thought, oh my goodness, this looks different. When I saw this, I said, well, you look at an artist and, we do pigeonhole. Artists get
Yeah.
pigeonholed. And if you let people pigeonhole you, that's your problem. If you say, I don't do anything else, but if I do this one thing, but I do it really well, and I do it in different ways, that's not a bad pigeonholing because then that creates customers.
For sure. And sometimes I think that sometimes it takes a while to pull the customers along with you. I mean, for these circles, I've been doing them now for 4 or 5 years. And it's only now that customers are starting to be comfortable with where do you put a circle. And so my original concept was that I wanted to have, I don't know, 8 or 10 of these in different shapes, just bubbling up a side wall of a staircase or something. And so I call them my bubble walls. And then this is really the first year people have actually said, oh, I'd really like to have a bubble wall. I'd like to have, something in a boardroom that's kind of all these different bubbles. And so I do think that you have to have a vision, but you also have to be willing to kind of stick to your vision for a while as you bring along your customers and they become comfortable with what you're producing.
Yeah, I've always said that an artist is usually 10 years ahead of their audience.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean slow down and let them catch up. You have
No.
to and a lot of them do. A lot of people slow down and they just say, well, they just have to buy my existing inventory before I make any new ones. That's the wrong thing to do. But these ones feel very porthole like if I can see in a coastal area, you're if you had a show at a naval base or someplace where there's, yachts and things, but I would think they would see portholes. They would,
Yeah, absolutely.
and that's what they would see out their ship, right? And you think, and a lot of times, like you're saying, is finding a market for your work, and you say, well, where, what does that people in Dallas buy different than what people in Toronto buy?
Mm-hmm. And I think that's also just a critical part of if you're doing shows outside your own city, is you do need to research that, and you need to research the decor colors, because I know, for example, in San Diego, to do those black ones, it's a hard sell there because their decor is very light. Their floors are light, the furniture is light, the walls are light. And so the piece becomes just too dominant. And so I think that's an important part of doing your research before you do these shows so that you'll have a higher chance of being successful. And it isn't that I paint for that market, but I'll just be choosy about what I ship to that market to sell.
It's expensive to ship and get over the border and do all those things. It's you better
Absolutely
be successful when you're down there.
Yeah.
Rather than have to drag everything home.
Exactly. Yeah.
Nice.
Better to come home with an empty crate.
So when you go down there, do you have a gallery that you can leave the work that doesn't sell with the gallery?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Sometimes when I did Dallas, actually a friend of mine was going to drop off some work to a gallery in Memphis, and the woman said, oh, I really like Kate's work too. So she ended up taking a bunch of my work as well. So some of that is kind of serendipity and just opportunities that fall in your lap that you just I always say yes to. And sometimes I have to ship the stuff back. It depends on the show and depends also on how much I need the work back in Canada.
Yeah. Yeah. This again is a very, you can see I did a little blow up on your,
yeah.
on the one side, and I don't know if I did it. I don't think I made it any bigger than the actual large picture. But what inspired this piece?
So this is part of my Horizon collection, and this was actually inspired by a couple of things. I've been trying to figure out. I've always been kind of fascinated with gold foil and tried to figure out how to incorporate it without it looking tacky or cheesy, which was not so easy. And then my husband and I moved up to the cottage for almost a year during COVID. And so all we really saw was the lake, frozen and not frozen, the tree line and the sky, and that's it. And this series was basically inspired by that view that we saw for a year. So the bottom of it is, again, it's palette knife work using the side of the knife, but the same color palettes and kind of mixing them on the knife and on the board. And then with the gold foil, as if the light is just kind of almost like flaring up into the atmosphere. And then using 2/3 of these pieces are the wood panel. So it's really celebrating the wood grain.
Yeah. No, I just feel these, the shards, I'll call them shards across the horizon line there. They're not daubles, right? They're not daubles from a paint palette knife. Mm-hmm. And trying that transition between water and sky, like you're trying to figure out that's the horizon line or the tree line, or they're pretty bare in the wintertime, right? A lot of times there's not a lot of color. You're dealing with usually a lot of grays, and but this is a nice interpretation of that, and but it's just so different than your other pieces, and it's a good change. It's not a bad change. I think
it was also just fun. There's a lot of technical challenges with this particular collection, and so it was just sort of a fun thing to just sort of get into a bit of a problem-solving mode, like in terms of how I really wanted the gold foil to look like it was flaring up. I didn't want it to be all chunky. I wanted it to be very random and very irregular,
Yeah.
but still work. Gold foil, if anybody's worked with it, knows it gets everywhere, like in your hair and in your eyelashes, and it'll attach itself to the birch panel if I'm not careful. So I wanted to really keep it also within that really fine line just around the horizon line.
Yeah,
So that was fun.
yeah, it's a delicate process
Mm-hmm.
when you have to burnish and put that stuff on. But I did a little bit of it, and I said, that's it. I don't want to deal with that anymore. But I have artists that they paint on gold leaf, beautiful paintings, but I didn't see the value in a lot of that in doing it. I guess you're just trying to work with different surfaces. And
I think for me, this work was very, it was almost like meditative,
yeah,
because you have to go slowly. I'm not normally a slow person. Everything I do seems to be fast. So you have to go slowly. You have to be careful,
yeah.
And when I'm doing like a 40 by 60, it's a lot of gold. It takes a lot of time. Right. So I think there was also something about,
Well, you're worth a lot. You're worth a lot more when you get gold on you and you can't get it off your face.
yeah, that's true.
The value went up.
Yeah. And this is another one that is part of my color field collection. So again, you can see trying to really play with those really bright colors, making it really positive and energetic without ever crossing that boundary into chaotic. So hopefully I haven't crossed that boundary.
It's clashing with my red background.
Because of it, but that's your issue, not mine.
Yeah, no, it's yeah. But again, I like, it's almost like the background's been kind of sponged a little bit, I kind of I like that. I like a textural piece. And they said, is this on canvas, this one?
That one is, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I can see your canvases pieces are I guess I'm preferring, I like the textural aspects of it, I guess. That's a personal thing. But
No, I like the texture too. And it's interesting because I used to do a lot of resin. I used to resin a lot of my pieces.
yeah.
And again, it was that push pull between palette knife work is supposed to be about texture. With the resin, it flattens it out, right? And so I'm kind of going back to really celebrating the texture. And I like, there was a piece I just finished and it was in my studio. And as the sun went across it, it was actually casting shadows. The texture of the paint was casting shadows on the piece. And it almost looked like it was moving, which I just thought was really cool.
Yeah. No, it's, let's give another shot here. Yes. There's two ones here. Excuse me.
Yeah. So these are kind of part of my harmony collection, and harmony and energy and motion are very close. I think harmony just tends to look a little bit more floral like, but it still follows the same elements of the multicolored background and the kind of the organic shapes and the looseness of the palette knife, and then kind of chunks of color.
Yeah, in contrast between the two, one's a nocturnal feeling for sure. The night scene again with the darks, but it really does snap the color up quite a bit, the blacks. But I do like more the impressionistic aspect of making color pop, more so than on a black. But a black has a very dramatic edge about it. For I guess this one feels like I said. There's a nightlife in the woods, right? And I've walked in the woods at night, and it's different than walking in the same path during the day.
Oh yeah.
The nightlife out there is different than the day life, right? And the bugs and the things are out, and we don't get the fireflies like Ontario gets fireflies, right? You'll get those little sparkles that I used to live in Toronto area and London, and they used to get those at night. I used to like watching big June bugs and the fireflies. And,
absolutely. And this year actually, last year I guess at the cottage too was just like the fireflies were everywhere. Like it was really quite remarkable. And you're right. Then you got the owls and you've got everything else and the loons, and you sit outside and you just realize how much is going on at night, especially when you get those super black nights and you can see the Milky Way, and there's not even a moon to kind of cast a shadow, and it's a pretty magical place to be.
We had a lot of really good auroras this year, like really. So the one on the left here, the painting, the Joy of Spring, that sky, that aurora sky is just, some of them are amazing. And you'd get those in the north as well. at your cabin?
A little bit. We've only had it once at the cottage, but it is my bucket list. I want to go and take I want to stay in a nice hotel in a yurt or something and go and really check out the aurora.
Go to Alaska or the Yukon, I guess.
Yeah, I
But
just
you
think
don't have
that'd
to
be
go that
awesome.
far. You got to go to northern Saskatchewan, and you will get them.
I know, but I'm kind of an all or nothing girl. If I'm going to do it, I'm going to go
Just go to
way up north.
northern Ontario. Oh, you want the 5-star viewing of the Northern Lights.
I do.
This one I really like. This really shows a very textural daubling here that you're doing. Again, this is probably a canvas thing, correct?
No, that one actually is panel.
It's panel.
Yeah, so I'm a little bit erratic. Sometimes,
Yeah.
a lot of times I work on panel because
Change it up. Why not?
Exactly. And so this again, I really love the mixing of the colors. I like the fact that it looks like they're almost petals that are overlaying each other, and that's kind of part of the fun.
Yeah.
But you can see here too, this is why I do most of the work in one sitting, because once those petals dry, they're very textural. And if I want to overpaint them, I've got to actually take an X-Acto knife and slice them down first, which
and the other thing is, if you let this stuff dry, you're done. You can dabble over them, I guess, a little bit, but it's like running on a bumpy road.
Yeah. Normally what I do at the very end is actually I often will use a color called liquid silver, and I'll kind of touch the peaks of the paint, and then that will actually kind of almost reflect light as if it's sort of shimmering.
Well, that's a nice option. That I never thought of that.
Feel free to steal it.
Yeah, I don't work with a palette knife except if I'm scraping something down.
Yeah.
But that was really great. I think we have I think there might be one. There you are.
Oh, with my bubble wall.
There's your bubble wall, and everything is there. Yeah. And everybody can write that down. But I guess we're good, Stephen. Yeah, excellent. There you go.
Actually,
awesome.
it'll be all there, so people will be able to see Miss Kate's information, her YouTube channel, and her Instagram, and then when she starts talking to artists again, it'll all be there. So
yeah,
you can.
It was great talking with you and sharing your processes with a lot of people here.
So I have to ask my famous questions, Kate, that nobody asks, but being the Jew from I know, right? Being the Jew from New York, usually blunt. So I can ask these questions. It's like dealing in Naples, Florida, except I'm alive. Anyway, so there you go.
Now I'm scared.
I don't. No. Naples. I've been there many times. After you step over all the dead bodies on Main Street on the 5th, and because they're all 107 years old, it's very exciting. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm not really. Anyway, so your art, what's it? Where does it start at? Like, if someone wants to, I saw you do commissions, so we're going to put that aside. But if someone likes one of your pieces, it starts where and goes to where?
Do you mean in terms of people buying it, or where?
No, not age, like dollars. Like if someone says, I saw a piece and I want to buy a piece from Kate. I mean, art, a 6-year-old can love your art, and a 106-year-old person can love your art. I think your art is beautiful. Like I told you before the show, that's why we have Paul doing the interviews, because if it was David and I was like, that's pretty. Look at that's, all your stuff is beautiful and vivid, and it's all gorgeous, made me smile. So anybody can buy it.
Start with your 12, a 12 by 12. There you go.
So
yes.
I actually go smaller than that, because I am a huge fan of, I really think that everybody should have original art in their home. And I think that everyone should be able to have a piece that talks to them, that they can actually afford. So I do these little 6-inch by 6-inch pieces that I actually use as a sketchbook. And I work through different ideas and concepts and stuff. And then I sell them for $125 a piece, $150 on my website, because it includes shipping. Right. And then it goes right up to like $6,000 or $7,000 for, a 60 by 60.
Very cool.
So, and everything in between. And when I do my shows, I always like to have something at kind of all those price points, so that people can kind of have a little one. A friend of mine refers to those as my gateway drugs, and they can go right up.
Very cool. So get them hooked and then go from there. I like that.
Exactly.
A lot of artists don't do that, right? They're like, we'll say to them, so where does your stuff start at? And they're like, $3,500. And I'm like, and for the 20-year-old that wants to start collecting, they probably don't have $3,500 yet. Yeah. That they can use as disposable. I want a piece of art and whatever. So
I think that just, to me, that just buys back into that whole elitism of art and original art and fine art. And I would really love to see, I go into so many homes which are just gorgeous homes, just finished this huge renovation. Everything is beautiful, but they have no real art on the wall. And I
Right.
think it's because a lot of people haven't been brought up with real art. And I think it's just unfortunate that the concept is that you can't afford it. And I
Right.
want people to be able to afford it. I have people that come at every show and they'll just buy another little 6x6. They're
Nice.
designed to all mix and match. So they kind of build their collection over the years.
Yeah, and that's how it should be. I've been collecting for a while, so we buy everything. But the first thing I learned is you have to buy something that touches you, because you're just buying
Absolutely.
it because you think it's going to appreciate. It's a waste of money. So
Yeah.
I've been very fortunate that everything I've bought, I like. It's also gone up in value. But my friend's father, when I started, said, no, buy it because you like it. He says, because you're going to buy something one day and it's not going to go up. It's going to do nothing. And if that's what you're buying it for, don't. And I've never bought anything I didn't love. So everything that we have, it's like stuff I look at and go, ooh, this is nice. So and it makes
Yeah.
you smile, which is the important thing.
I think that's totally critical. So,
Yeah.
and I do probably about 40% of my work is commissions, because a lot of
Okay.
people kind of go, oh, I love this piece. I want this size, work with them on a document, but I have a zero risk commission policy. And so
Right.
I'll produce a piece. If they don't totally love it, they don't have to take it. And
Oh, wow.
part of the reason for that is that it reduces the barrier of risk for other people to move forward with a commission, knowing they're not going to be stuck with something. But
Right.
also, I do think that it's important to have something that viscerally talks to you, and you can't always articulate why this one does, that one doesn't.
Yeah. No, I agree. No, and your stuff is absolutely gorgeous. And when I was saying, I'm making fun of Naples because it's, Florida. And in New York, that's where all the Jews go to die. So it's just the way it is. So it's what we do. Or we call it Israel South. So, but I have friends who live in Naples that are in their 30s and 40s and 50s. And they go down Fifth Avenue in Naples, and that's where all
Yeah.
the art galleries are. And I'm sure you're in one of those.
Well, send
And
them to
that's
Gallery One.
there you go. Gallery One in Naples. You can go get Kate's stuff.
Yeah.
So now, do you have any shows or anything other than the podcast and your YouTube channel that are going to get resurrected? Do you have any shows that are going to come out that you want people to go other than Gallery One in Naples?
Sure.
What else do you
Yeah.
have?
I mean, I just came off of doing I think it was 5 shows in the last 6 weeks. So it's been
Oh, wow.
pretty crazy. I'm part of the Art Gallery of Hamilton spring show and sale, which is in Hamilton next weekend. And then I'm actually driving down to Chicago to do the Chicago One of a Kind.
Okay.
And then I'm doing an artist residency in France for a couple of weeks, which will be awesome.
Now, when you say France, is that Epcot France or Disney, where you see 60 countries in a
that's
day, or the real France? Okay,
Yeah.
just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
So,
We're staying
very
in a
cool.
chateau. My sister is an artist as well. And so she and
Right.
I are doing a joint collaboration work that is actually an installation piece.
Okay.
Even though both of
Wow.
us are painters, we thought, well, this is an opportunity to truly explore the boundaries of what we can do and be super creative and really play and do kinetic mobiles and handmade paper and found
Very cool.
objects and stuff. It'll be super fun, I think.
That will be fun.
Yeah.
Well, if you get bored and you're in France and you decide you want to do a live show with us for Art in Canada, we will do a show with you to show what you and your sister did.
That would be cool.
Yeah, so I'll leave that with after the show. The three of us can figure out logistics, and then David will be back, and he'll be pulling his hair out because I'm just committing him to a whole bunch of stuff, which I love so much.
Hey, that's the way it works.
That's the way don't go on holiday. What can I tell you? It's not my fault.
Yeah, it's his fault, really.
That's how I look at it the same way. See, someone that finally agrees with me. Thank God. Anyway, Kate, it's been a pleasure. Paul, as always, you do a wonderful job. Everybody, please subscribe and like. You can get all Kate's information down here, as David likes me to point out. And now, Kate, unfortunately, you have to sit through our ending credits. It's all of 28 seconds. So,
well, I just want to say it's been a real pleasure to meet you, Stephen, one of the old farts. I look forward to meeting you as the second old fart. And Paul, always a pleasure to talk art with you. I can't believe that the hour's gone by so quickly.
Yep.
Well,
thank you so much.
Do post stuff from France. We'd love to see that on social media as well. So
I will. Yep. Yeah.
All right,
plug
guys.
away.
Cheers. Bye, guys.
Thanks.